Tales of the Slayer, Blood and Brine. She alone stands against the vampires, the demons, and the forces of darkness. Slayer Robin Whitby, disguising herself as a man, is the pirate captain of her ship Neptune's Lady in 1661. Along with her watcher, Dr. William Henry Pratt, she and her crew prowl the Caribbean. Encountering a derelict treasure ship full of stolen Inca gold, she battles curses, leeches, vampires, a mutinous crew, and a kraken. Into every generation a slayer is born, one girl in all the world, to find the vampires where they gather and to stop the spread of their evil, to swell their numbers. In our time, that girl is Buffy Summers. But Buffy is merely one slayer in an eternal continuum of warriors for the powers that be. The Caribbean, 1661. One-legged Jack Tyburn was a blackguard when he was alive. Dead, he was a monster. Animal eyes, the color of Spanish gold, glared at the slayer from the buccaneer's transformed countenance, which now resembled that of an enraged jungle cat. Fangs jutted from his gaping jaws as he snarled at Robin Whitby from the rear of the quarterdeck. This peg-legged pirate stood aft of the tiller with one taloned hand on an 8-foot-long steering bar and the other clutching onto the scalp of the unfortunate helmsman, Jeremiah Pyle. "Help me, Captain!" the terrified old tar entreated Robin, unable to escape Tyburn's demonically powerful grasp, no matter how frantically he thrashed. "For mercy's sake, Captain, help me!" Fangs like daggers dipped toward Pyle's neck. "Avast ye!" Robin called out sharply. Her husky voice testified to considerable acquaintance with rum and tobacco. Cutlass in hand, she strode across the main deck to confront her former crewman. Her vibrant auburn hair was pigtailed in the back, sailor style, while a blue woolen frock coat flapped open to reveal the striped linen shirt and canvas trousers beneath. A cravat of crimson silk knotted around her neck added a touch of color and flair to the captain's ensemble. "Strike your colors, Captain Jack Tyburn, or I'll feed your scurvy flesh to the sharks." A gibbous moon silvered the sails of the double-masted schooner Neptune's Lady, and the sharpened argent gleam of the pirate's captain's upraised cutlass, which had once been blessed by an honest Puritan minister. A brace of pistols was slung across Robin's chest, but she knew better than to waste good powder on hell-spawn such as this. She was the slayer, after all, and this was hardly the first leech she had run alongside. "I knew it was no mere fever he caught," she thought, carousing in Port Royal with that doxy Darla. Seeing her suspicions, proven all too seaworthy, provided meager satisfaction at this perilous juncture, and a surfeit of opportunities to rue her own foolhardiness. I should have never set sail with him aboard, all pale and trembling below decks, and now the sun has sunk beneath the waves, and here I be, many legs to sea, with a cursed leech at the tiller. "You hear me, Jack Tyburn?" she challenged him. Fierce eyes, as blue as the sea, admitted no trace of fear or trepidation. Her boots pounded decisively across the tar-caulked timbers of the deck as she marched past the mainmast toward the stern, deftly avoiding the working sheets of the ship's fore and aft rigging. A warm Caribbean breeze blew from the northwest, rustling her hair and filling the billowing white sails above her head. "Leave that old salty dog be. His blood's not yours to quaff." Provoked by her scornful tone and cognizant of her flashing blade, the leech shoved Pyle aside and fixed a ferocious gaze on the approaching captain. A trickle of spit ran down his unshaven chin as he licked his lips in anticipation. "All's ye command, Captain Whitby, sir," Tyburn answered her, flashing his newly acquired fangs. His foul breath reeked of both rum and the grave. "I have a powerful thirst, I do, but a captain's blood to suit me fine." Robin had not truly expected the mutinous devil to surrender. Her sole intent having been to distract the leech from his intended prey by diverting his sanguinary attentions to herself. Now, meeting Tyburn's blazing glare with a fiery broadside of her own, she watched out of the corner of her eye as Pyle, ashen-faced and quaking, scrambled toward the bow, that is, where he joined many of his fellow crewmen, who hung back in fear and dumbstruck awe as their captain vaulted onto the quarterdeck to face the unholy thing that Tyburn had become. Yet more seamen watched tensely from the rigging overhead or crouched anxiously behind all the silent cannons mounted along the ship's bulwarks. Robin did not falter men for their terror in the face of evil incarnate. They were brave enough men, she knew, when squaring off against mortal foes or while daring the tempestuous caprices of the sea, but a genuine fiend straight out of purest nightmare was another tankard of grog altogether. Even the wildest sea-wolf might quail before perdition's own children unless they were chosen to the task, as she was. Tyburn gave the tiller a violent yank, causing Neptune's lady to lurch sharply to starboard. Despite her sea legs, Robin had to grab onto the nearby taffrail to steady herself. "You'll have to do better than that, Jack," she called out defiantly, eager to separate the leech's head from his shoulders. "I'm coming for you fetid bilge-rat." "Aye, aye, Captain," he mocked her. Robin braced herself for the battle, anticipating that Tyburn would lunge at her like the beast he was, slashing and tearing with fangs and claws. Instead, he took hold of the main boom with both hands and shoved with all his hell-born strength. The swinging timber struck Robin full on, knocking her onto her back. A queue of tightly bound red hair scarcely cushioned the blow as the back of her skull collided thunderously with the floor of the deck. Worse, her silver cutlass slipped from her fingers and went sliding athwart the deck into the scuppers. "My blade!" she thought in dismay, cursing her luck. Seizing his advantage, Tyburn sprang forward, his oaken peg clattering against the planks as he moved with preternatural speed and agility, especially for one so crippled as he. In a heartbeat, he stood astride Robin's supine form, ivory fangs at the ready. She reached instinctively for her sword, but found it tantalizingly out of reach. "Very well," she resolved coolly. "We'll just make do without." Without hesitation, she wrapped her fingers around Tyburn's peg leg and snapped the tapered wooden pin from its lodging beneath the one-legged buccaneer's knee. Deprived of the peg's support, Tyburn yelped and toppled forward. Robin swiftly turned the point of the captured peg upwards so that his leech fell squarely upon the makeshift stake. He let out a startled cry as his own leg pierced his heart. Jack Tyburn had spent his entire mortal life at sea. No surprise, then, that the grave dust that suddenly rained down on Robin, powdering her face and hands, had a distinctively salty taste. "Ah!" Robin's face wrinkled in disgust. She clambered quickly to her feet, spitting out a mouthful of briny grit and brushing the rest of Tyburn's disintegrated remains from her face and clothes. An enormous roar accompanied her rising as dozens of onlooking buccaneers cheered their captain's victory over yet another stinking leech. The heartfelt cries, born of sheer amazement and relief, drowned out even the sound of the surging rollers crashing against the schooner's sturdy hull. Sailors, as you know, much like Cajuns, are a superstitious lot. Not one of them was troubled by the existence of such as Tyburn had become. In their voyages, she and her crew had encountered all manner of hellspawn, from Aztec mummies to flesh-eating zombies. Jeremiah Pyle hurried to Robin's side and tugged at her arm in grateful supplication. "Thank you, mighty Captain, thank you, mightily," he exclaimed, admiration beaming from the old salt's withered, sun-baked features. "By the powers, you're the bravest man I ever sailed under." Or woman, Robin imagined, although scarcely a man aboard knew as much. Presently, in the great cabin beneath the quarterdeck, the ship's surgeon took inventory of her surgeries. "Your skull appears none the worse for its abrupt rendezvous with the deck," Dr. William Henry Pratt announced sonorously. Gentle fingers probed the sore spot at the rear of her cranium. "The swelling already looks to be abating." His cultured accent betrayed his Oxford education as surely as his sepulchral tones betokened his grave and prudent temperament, particularly where the slayer was concerned. For this physician, whom had contrived to be taken aboard Neptune's lady many long voyages ago, was not just the ship's doctor. He was also her watcher. "Ha!" Robin laughed, reveling in the low and glow of her easy victory over the bloodthirsty seaman. "The day I cannot cross swords against the likes of Jack Tyburn, dead or alive, is the day the council needs must press a new slayer into service." She grinned exuberantly, resting her back against the chair facing the captain's deck. She glanced at the locked door leading to the deck outside. Sunlight entered the narrow cabin through a pair of open windows at the stern, while the everyday sounds of sailors at work penetrated the varnished pine walls. "Did you hear the men cheering for me just now?" Although Pratt's neatly groomed hair was a uniform silver, his bushy eyebrows had remained black as pitch. "I wonder if they would trumpet quite so loudly," he asked, raising one such sable brow. "Were they knowledgeable of your true gender?" His somber query dampened Robin's high spirits. That her shipmates might discover her womanly nature was a constant worry. A pirate captain ruled only at the sufferance of her crew, and Robin lived in fear that her loyal brethren would turn against her should they learn the truth about their captain. Now mind, she oft-times suspected that many of the men already knew the way of things, but were content to feign otherwise. A sort of willful blindness, if you will. comparable to that of which allowed ordinary mortals to blithely ignore the presence of leeches and demons in their midst. And although familiar with the vampires, the crew were unacquainted with the notion of slayers. It would never occur to them to think that a female might be more proficient at battling leeches than a man. Yet the question of how the crew would react should exact the particulars of her sex be forced upon them was one that often troubled her mind. In truth, she feared the exposure of her masquerade far more than any of the foul hellspawn that she had vanquished during her years as slayer. But have no fears on that score, she assured her watcher with greater bravado than she genuinely felt. She reflexively reknotted the silk cravat about her throat, which served to conceal the absence of her Adam's apple, just as her heavy coat and mannish attire conspired to hide her feminine proportions from the world. Only here, in the exclusive privacy of her cabin, did she dare shed any of her sartorial camouflage. I've played the man too long and too well to let me secret slip through any chuckle-headed blunder. True enough, Pratt conceded, fully aware that Robin had posed as a boy ever since her 12th year when she first ran away to sea in search of adventure. He stepped away from the captain's chair, circling around to address her face to face. Unlike the garish and exotic attire flaunted by the rest of the pirate's crew, he preferred a conservative gray suit, always impeccably pressed and tailored. Let us pray the circumstances never converge to give the game away. Sail ho! The cry from the crow's nest brought every man Jack onto the main deck or up into the rigging in search of a better look. Leaning out over the port gunwale, the balmy tropical sunlight warming her face, Robin felt her heart beat faster in anticipation. Could this be a prize worth taking, sailing near enough to catch the avaricious eye of the outlook? Neptune's lady had been prowling the sapphire waters off the Spanish Main in pursuit of such as an unwary vessel laden, perhaps with tobacco, wine, or stolen Inca gold. "After her, me hearties!" she called out to her crew, who eagerly threw themselves into the task, trimming the sails and hauling the lines. The deck of the schooner became a hubbub of activity as the avid buccaneers readied both the ship and themselves for battle. Tattooed seamen, their bodies likewise marked by scores, one bloody frays on both land and sea, scurried fore and aft. Pistols and muskets were primed and loaded, while the ladies' 8 cannons were freshly rammed with round shot. The sun was high and the wind was steady. Robin could not have asked for better conditions. She strained her eyes to catch a better glimpse of the ship on the horizon. Joining her at the rail, Dr. Pratt offered her a spyglass, which she gratefully accepted. The scope brought the mystery ship closer into view, showing her a vast, 3-masted, square-rigged vessel nearly twice the length and perhaps 5 times the tonnage of Neptune's lady. Robin whooped excitedly as she recognized the unmistakable lines of an imposing Spanish galleon. "Look lively, lads, look lively! We've got a golden fish on the line!" she shouted at the top of her lungs. A cacophony of lusty cheers greeted her declaration as the jubilant buccaneers realized that they had lucked upon the richest prize of all, a Spanish treasure ship transporting the plunder of the New World back to Europe. Robin grinned wolfishly. Despite the lofty nature of her calling as slayer, she felt no compunctions against preying on the seafaring transports of the hated Dons. Spain was the enemy of England, after all, not to mention the oppressor of the native Indians, who had suffered greatly under the sword and lash of the merciless conquistadors, as well as was Spain the bastion of the dreaded Inquisition. The Inquisition, whose untender mercies had, according to Dr. Pratt, already claimed the lives of at least one slayer and her watcher. No one expects the Inquisition. Robin saw nothing wrong in depriving the Spanish crown of gold and silver that the Dons themselves had savagely looted from the fallen Incan and Aztec empires. "Congratulations, Captain," Pratt said sincerely. A patriotic Englishman, he shared Robin's enmity toward Imperial Spain, had never objected to her piratical ways, provided they did not interfere with her duties as slayer. Thankfully, the West Indies held more than enough black magic and bloodsuckers to keep her suitably employed on mankind's behalf. By the voodoo cults alone, more than evidence that Providence had been wise in placing a slayer at large in the Caribbean. At this moment, however, Robin looked forward to a business of less eldritch sort. Peering into the spyglass, she scanned the horizon in search of any other vessels that might be escorting the slow-moving galleon, given the popularity of piracy in these parts. It was not uncommon for ships carrying large amounts of valuable cargo to sail in the company of other armed vessels, with perhaps even a man of war, too, added for protection. Robin had no wish to lead her crew into battle against vastly unequal odds. To her delight, she espied no such ambush. The solitary galleon appeared to be just that. A straggler, she speculated, left behind by a larger fleet, perhaps. If so, then the galleon's tardiness was the pirate's good fortune. The ponderous treasure ship could not possibly elude the swifter and nimbler schooner. Nimbly and chimbly, schooner it was. Already Neptune's lady was closing on the other ship, cracking on all the sail as the warm trade wind sped the schooner toward her prey like a wooden dagger hurled at the undead heart of a blood-gorged leech. "Raise our colours!" she shouted. Within minutes her own singular banner flapped atop the mainmast. A skull and crossbones against a field of Stygian black, Robin's flag resembled the celebrated Jolly Roger, except in one respect. The bone-white death's head bore the fangs of a newly slain vampire, thus serving as a warning of sorts to the living and the living dead alike. Soon the towering stern of the galleon loomed before them, and Robin no longer needed a spyglass to keep her prize in sight. Gleeful pirates brandishing cutlasses and boarding axes crowded the bow, yowling like demons and thumping their feet upon the deck in hopes of chilling the blood of all aboard the Spanish vessel. Sharp-eyed marksmen peered down the barrel of their muskets, ready to pick off any gunners who might entertain notions of deploying the galleon's own cannons against the approaching schooner. Robin caught a whiff of burning matches on the air and knew that the pirates were ready to fire the 6-pounders at her command. Much to Robin's surprise, the galleon made no attempt to outrun Neptune's lady. Was the treasure ship's captain, she wondered, a man of uncommon good sense? She hoped as much. It would spare much bloodshed if the galleon simply surrendered without a fight, as many a cornered ship had been known to do. Indeed, what else was the Jolly Roger for, if not to frighten ship captains and crews into submission? For herself, Robin was always willing to grant quarter to any mortal man or woman, who wholeheartedly requested it. Yes, leeches, of course, were another story. "Bring her alongside," Robin called to the helmsman. "Make ready the grapples." Infinitely more maneuverable than the bulky galleon, Neptune's lady came abreast of the larger vessel, whose name was emblazoned upon her starboard bow, El Dorado. A carved mahogany figurehead in the shape of an Aztec princess paid no heed to the pirate schooner as Robin's ship glided within boarding distance of her quarry. The lady's strakes all but scraped against the galleon's hull. In contrast to the schooner, whose deck was positively overcrowded with raucous buccaneers, the El Dorado appeared curiously unpeopled. Staring up at the mighty ship's tall bulwarks, Robin expected to see human faces, frightened, fierce, or both, peering down at her. Not yet a single countenance did she see, save for the painted profile of the wooden princess. "Benjamin Fancy!" she yelled to the lookout, whose lofty vantage point offered him a better view of the galleon's upper decks. "Do you see hide a hair of the crew?" "Nary a soul, Captain," Fancy shouted down, raising his voice over the flapping of the sails. He spit rudely onto the undefended Spanish ship. "The cowardly swabs must be hiding below decks, Perhaps, Robin thought, or perhaps not. A sense of foreboding fell upon her like a sudden squall as she eyed the galleon with wary instincts of a slayer, as if that haunted room were actually stretching. Looking more closely, it was clear that the El Dorado was floating adrift upon the sea, following no particular course or compass. Her huge white sails were arrayed haphazardly without regard to the fickle play of the winds, while her intimidating gun ports remained shut and silent, like the lowered eyelids of a corpse. She cupped her hands around her mouth in order to be heard by any ears that might be listening aboard the El Dorado. "Heave to!" she commanded, ordering the galleon's masters to bring their vessels to an immediate halt. "Do you hear me, you cringing curs? Heave to at once, or risk the vengeance of Captain Rob Whitney." Her name, she knew, was spoken with fear and respect from the Barbados to the Carolinas. Nonetheless, there came no answer from the errant treasure ship, only the creaking of the masts as they struggled into the strain of the untended sails. "This bodes ill," Dr. Pratt intoned in a hush. Ordinarily, it was his custom to go below ere the fighting began, the better to ensure his own safety, so that he might afterward tend the wounds of all those who injured in the fray. On this occasion, however, no imminent danger to life or limb appeared to be in the offing. Which was not to say, Robin realized, that the mysterious galleon did not hold hidden perils, more malignant than armed and defiant Spanish sailors. Aye, she agreed. In her time as slayer, Rob Whitby had learned to trust her intuition where the unearthly was concerned, and right now a clammy prickling upon her skin warned that there was deviltry at work here. This has the stink of evil about it. Yes, Pratt surmised. Evil is older and more obscene than we know. He was never one to look at the sunny side of things, her watcher. The sooner I get to slaying, then. Seeing nothing to be gained by further prattle, she hooked her cutlass to the baldric and clambered into the rigging, briskly climbing the ratlines until she was able to look down upon the barren deck of the galleon. Grappling hooks thrown by her excited and impatient freebooters arced over the El Dorado's gunnels, binding the galleons to the schooner. Both ships shuddered as they came together atop the waves. After me, mates! Robin exhorted her crew before somersaulting off the forward gaff to land flat-footed upon the spray-splashed planks of the galleon's waist. Benjamin Fancy had spoken truly from his lofty perch. From where she could see, standing amidship fore of the mainmast, the upper decks of the El Dorado appeared as deserted as those of any abandoned hulk left rotting in some lawless Caribbean harbor. Her keen eyes hastily examined the capstan and coiled cables for any telltale splashes of blood, or hearts, as might be left by some shipboard massacre or mutiny, but none such was to be found, although she spotted ample evidence of past tumult and disorder. Hatches left open, mouldy cheese, tarpaulins torn asunder, the shrouds and stays dangling uselessly, and tar-smeared ropes strewn about the deck like seaweed. Drunken buccaneers at the height of the revels could not have left the galleon in a greater state of disarray, let alone a shipboard of fastidious dons in charge of the Empire's treasure. Robin scowled. Something untoward had transpired here, that was certain. But what was that something? Already she had her suspicions. Howling and hollering more from habit than need, her boisterous crew of cutthroats boarded the galleon in Robin's wake, climbing up and over the rails with their dirks and cutlasses gripped between their teeth. As their bare feet dropped into the deck, they glared about them ferociously, accustomed to raising Cain with the sword and pistol. Today, alas, they found themselves sheepishly lowering their weapons due to a lamentable lack of Spaniards to threaten. The baffled buccaneers looked so abashed and discomfited that Robin would have laughed had she not been on guard against supernatural evil. "Luffer, smartly," she instructed the nearest crewman. Floating freely, the El Dorado was a danger to both herself and Neptune's lady. "Bring her to a halt instead." Robin's raised voice to address each and every boarder. "The rest of ye, keep a weather eye out for trouble. This lumbering grey barge may not be as empty as she presents herself with." While obedient seamen hurried to the task of curbing the galleon's wayward drifting, Robin carried her investigation forward. Cutlass in hand, she stalked the unswabbed planks, climbing onto the railed deck atop the forecastle. And from there she observed that the El Dorado's sea boats had not been launched, but remained secure in their berths upon the spar deck. The missing Spaniards had not fled the galleon in their own boats, then. So where were they? Robin had heard tell of death ships such as this, found empty and abandoned upon the sea. Indeed, if her watcher were to believe, the annals of her predecessors were fair to bursting with accounts of such star-crossed vessels. More often than not, she recalled, 'twas a leech at work, feeding on the crews by night and consigning their bodies to the deep to avoid detection. "Captain! Captain!" An excited voice carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of fear called to Robin from the stern. She bounded off the forecastle, descending into the steps in a single leap, and dashed aft, where she found a cluster of her own men gathered below the quarterdeck within a shallow compartment just before the great cabin. "Hear those bells," one battle-scarred buccaneer said in a horrified hush. "Have you ever seen the like of that?" At first Robin could not discern what sight held the men so transfixed. "Clear the way! Clear!" she grunted, roughly elbowing her way through the packed throng, until she came nigh face to face with the mortal remains of the only Spaniard still remaining at his post. Standing upright at the helm, his lifeless body lashed tightly to the whipstaff, the dead man stared blindly forward, his bearded face contorted into a rictus of perpetual agony, His garments had been shredded from his corpse, making it impossible to determine his rank. His throat and torso were marked by a multitude of strange circular impressions, like the puckered kisses of a devil. These livid ring-like blemishes were the only wounds Robin saw upon the unfortunate Don, the exact nature of whose death was, she was at a loss to explain. As elsewhere aboard this cursed vessel, not a drop of spilled blood could she see or smell, although the deceased seaman was markedly pale beneath his typically swarthy complexion. And what rendered this unlucky mariner so bloodless, she pondered. Some new and unfamiliar breed of leech? Leave him to the sawbones, Robin ordered. Dr. Pratt would almost certainly want to examine the Spaniard's remains. As for me, I'm going below to flush out the vermin that done for this poor soul. You're all to stay above deck until I give the word to commence the pillaging. She swept a forbidding gaze across the faces of the assembled freebooters. Are we clear on that, me brethren? At any other rate, a blistering fusillade of grape shot would not have deterred the greedy buccaneers from immediately inspecting the contents of the galleon's hold. But the Eldorado's eerie silence and desolation, along with the ghastly spectacle of this doomed helmsman, had cast a pall over their unslaked lust for Spanish gold. Aye, Captain, said the boatswain, Jonas Pugh. Like his fellows, he appeared well content to let the captain brave the shadowy recesses of the galleon's lower decks before the rest of them. Just as you say, Captain. Very well, then, Robin confirmed. She paused a second to take her bearings before ducking her head into the companionway leading to the gun deck. She fully expected to find one or more leeches lurking below, far from the purifying rays of the sun, and was not so naive or inexperienced as to expect the hidden bloodsuckers to be completely dormant just because the sun had not yet sunk beneath the horizon. Robin knew too well that the living dead need only shun direct exposure to daylight. Indeed, indoors and sealed away from the sun, leeches were just as dangerous as they were at the blackest hour of the night. At first she had little need of the lamp she carried, as shards of daylight penetrated the darkness through the open hatches and cracks between the planks over her head. It required only a heartbeat for her azure eyes to accommodate themselves to the sunless murk of the cramped gun deck, which was fetid with reek of unwashed men crammed together for weeks or months at a time. P.U. Rats and roaches scurried away at the sound of her approach, but Robin paid them no heed. It was a fouler breed of infestation she sought. The footsteps of her crew, milling about upon the spar deck above her head, grew ever more faint as she headed deeper into the bowels of that ship, which thus far had proven to be as deserted as the upper decks. Here, at least, far from the sun, she depended upon the flickering glow of an oil lamp to see by. The lower she climbed down the companion, the more noisome the stench of the bilge polluted the air, permeating her nose and mouth. So, too, did her awareness of the presence of some diabolical evil increase nearer as she came to the galleon's secluded hold. Her skin fairly crawled from its proximity to the unnamed abomination. Arriving at last at the dank and dismal entrance to the hold, she took a deep breath, near gagging from the malodorous reek, then kicked open the hatch, and cutlass drawn sprang into the compartment beyond. By Davy Jones, accursed locker! She exclaimed aloud, her jaw dropping at what she beheld. Gold, yes, gold, lustrous and unmistakable, packed the spacious hold from top to bottom, reflecting what scant light filtered through the remains of the sundered hatch high above, as well as the paltry glow of Robin's lamp. Priceless Incan jewelry and sculptures, all seemingly forged of solid gold, glittered atop open casks overflowing with shining yellow doubloons, as well as flashing silver pieces of 8. The pagan idols, sporting jagged fangs and bestial features, stood out amidst the scattered riches by virtue of their blasphemous, albeit artfully rendered, grotesquerie. Robin's eye was caught by one bizarre graven image, roughly the size of a half-gallon tankard of rum, whose beak-like coils and jaws and tentacles gave it the look of a squid or an octopus perched regally atop a throne of skulls. Polished rubies, red as wine, served as the sea beast's eyes. Who in heaven's name would venerate such a loathsome thing? She wondered, repressing a shiver of revulsion. Before such philosophical concerns were driven from her mind by the sheer magnitude of the gleaming hoard before her. It's a king's ransom, by thunder. she exulted silently, unable for the nonce to tear her spellbound gaze away from the glittering treasure trove. No, no, an emperor's ransom. Even the Watcher's Council, whose wealth was legend, might envy such a fathomless sea of swag. Greed threatened to usurp the prudent caution required by her present circumstances, yet wiser counsels prevailed. Robin forcibly diverted her attention from the lavish spoils to search the hold for the leech she felt certain was hiding there. "Show yourself, you blood-sucking rogue," she taunted, holding her sanctified cutlass at the ready. "I know ye in here." Her mind's eyes envisioned the voracious vampire draining the crew of the El Dorado one by one, then tossing the bloodless corpses over the rails into the waiting brine. The murdered seamen consigned to the deep with neither right nor reverence. The grisly images filled the sails of her righteous year. Even popish Spaniards deserved better deaths than that. "What be the matter?" she mocked the anonymous darkness. "Have you gorged too much on hot Spanish blood to crave a taste of me own salty brew?" She slashed at the foul pungent air as her angry gaze swept her hold, which was, she observed, notably devoid of skulking rats, as though even those pestilential vermin feared to associate with the unnatural monstrosity she sensed nearby. "Ahoy, you maggoty glutton! Rise and face a slayer's vengeance!" The furtive gasps reached her ears, drawing Robin's attention to a closed teak casket, suspiciously akin to a coffin, lodged against a starboard bulkhead. Sea-blue eyes narrowed, and a knowing smile lifted the corners of her lips as she closed upon the casket and placed her free hand palm down upon the timber lid, where she felt the telltale vibrations of someone or something stirring inside the rectangular wooden chest. "Thought you could hide from me, did ye?" Robin thought smugly. Her left hand gripped the lid of the casket while the other raised the cutlass high. Her sly expression turned to one of unbending resolution. "Well, many's the leech that has thought the same afore I made dust of his unbreathing carcass." Exerting her more than mortal strength, she flung open the heavy task lid in full expectation of discovering a fiend-faced revenant cowering below, only to find herself staring into the frightened brown eyes of a dusky young Spanish woman, whose trembling hands were clasped together in a fervent prayer of supplication. "Socorro!" she pleaded desperately in her native tongue. "Madre Dios te socorro! Madre de Dios socorro!" Fresh tears gushed under her cheeks, already streaked by much weeping. Her panicked heart pounded so loudly that Robin would have known the terrified maiden was alive and not a duplicitous leech posing as a human, even if she had not spied the silver crucifix resting upon the other woman's lacy bodice. "Her name is Carmelita Ponte," Dr. Pratt revealed after rapid perusal of El Dorado's log. "She is the captain's half-Indian daughter, who was accompanying him on his voyage back to Spain, apparently." The physician sat behind a heavy wooden desk in the captain's private office beneath the galleon's poop deck. Chart-sized glass windows at the rear of the cabin admitted more than enough light to see by. "Furthermore, should there be any doubt, my examination confirms that the young lady is quite entirely mortal." Not for the first time, Robin thanked Providence that she had not beheaded the unfortunate girl by mistake. Only her supernal reflexes had allowed the slayer to check the fall of her cutlass in time to spare the other woman's life. Robin glanced at the captain's daughter, who now sat tensely on the velvet cushions atop a timber sea chest. Captain's daughter had no drunken sailor in sight. Although quieter now than when Robin first discovered her, Carmelita clearly remained in a state of dire agitation. Her bird-like gaze darted about fearfully, ever on guard against some unharmed peril, while she hugged herself tightly and whispered fretful prayers without cease. She started skittishly at the slightest unexpected sound, and she trembled within an elegant saffron gown that was now hopelessly rumpled and frayed around the edges. The silver crucifix still hung from a delicate chain around her neck. Robin wondered if the cross had played any part in keeping Carmelita alive, where so many others appeared to have perished. "Has she told you what transpired here?" she asked Pratt, having, for appearance's sake, permitted the doctor to examine his patient in private. "What became of her father and his crew?" A thorough search of El Dorado conducted after Robin gave her crew of buccaneers leave to explore the vessel had found no other survivors aboard the deserted treasure ship, nor any bloodthirsty stowaways for that matter. Pratt shook his head. I fear that Senorita Ponte's reason has not yet fully recovered from our ordeal, whatever it may have entailed. She is far from lucid, barely able to utter more than repeated prayers for deliverance and a few fragmentary words and phrases. Robin nodded in understanding. She had often witnessed the shocked reactions of ordinary men and women to attack by diabolical forces. Such a hellish encounters could shake even the strongest soul to its foundations. Has she been driven mad, then? Robin asked, heartfelt sympathy making her throat to tighten. Oh, I think not, Pratt replied. With time, by the grace of heaven, she may recover, but for the present I am reluctant to press her too strenuously on whatever tragic fate befell this vessel. To stir up such grievous memories now would do her more harm than good, I think. Robin knew better than to ask the doctor to violate his Hippocratic oath, which took precedence over even his duties as her watcher. And did she tell you nothing of what claimed her father and the rest? The persistent nebulousness of the threat frustrated Robin immensely. Have you no clue at all, then? Well, just one, Pratt divulged. A pensive scowl deepened the furrows above his hirsute brows. When questioned, as gently as possible, about the fate of her countrymen, she could only whisper the same puzzling phrase over and over. Muchas bocas. Many mouths. What the devil's that mean? Robin translated. A knock at the cabin door startled Carmelita, who sprang to her feet, her eyes wide with fright. Robin rushed to calm the distressed senorita. Easy now, lass. All's well. Nobody's going to hurt you. Lapsing in and out of Carmelita's native Spanish, Robin gently took the other woman by the shoulders and eased her directly into the sunbeam entering the cabin through the stern windows. See? Sunlight. Nothing can get ye, nothing from the dark. Robin's soothing tone, in concert with the comforting warmth of the bright golden light, quieted Carmelita. La luz del sol? She repeated uncertainly, looking from Robin's face to the illuminated window and back again. La luz del dia? Aye, that's it, Robin assured her. You're safe now with the light. Best to get her off this cursed ship before nightfall, Robin decided. She may feel safer aboard the Neptune's lady. The rapping the door came again, now accompanied by the raspy voice of her quartermaster, George Newgate. I beg your pardon, Captain, but the crew be wondering, what your orders, Beth? Now we made sure the vessel has been swept clean of the Dawns, yeah? His inquiry carried a subtly hectoring edge. Robin had long suspected that Newgate harbored ambitions of usurping her as captain some day. The crew's chafing to get back to port and divvy up the spoil, what? Hardly a surprise, Robin thought with some amusement. The pirates' uneasiness aboard the death ship had been much allayed by the discovery of the stupendous fortune stowed away in the galleon's hold. She had no doubt that, within their fevered imaginations, her gleeful cutthroats were already spending their shares amidst the copious taverns and brothels of Port Royal. Hold your fire, she called back, taking care, after speaking so softly to Carmelita, to deepen the timbre of her voice once more. I'll be with you directly. Casting one last look at the disturbed Spanish damsel, she headed for the door. Watch her, William, she urged her watcher, and keep reading about that bloody journal. I want to know what manner of devil we're dealing with here. A hasty council upon the El Dorado's main deck rapidly yielded a consensus concerning how best to take advantage of the buccaneers' newly won prize. At Robin's suggestion, it was agreed to split Neptune's lady's crew between the two vessels and sail them both back to Port Royal without delay. As a caution against treachery, half of the captured Spanish gold was transferred to the schooner's own hold, with the remainder left stowed away in the bowels of the galleon. With some reluctance, Robin turned over the command of Neptune's lady to George Newgate, so that she could remain aboard the death ship, the better to confront whatever evil might yet lurk unseen within the El Dorado's shadow-haunted hull. Dr. Pratt, on the other hand, accompanied Carmelita Ponte over to the pirate's schooner, where Robin hoped she would rest more easily, safely distant from the sight of her fellow Spaniard's mysterious disappearance. Dr. Pratt, on the other hand, accompanied Carmelita Ponte, and Robin also took pains to spare Carmelita the dreadful sight of her father's stripped and bloodless corpse. Only after the faltering senorita had been taken aboard Neptune's lady did the slayer cut down El Capitan Aponte's body from the whipstaff, and purely as a precaution severed the doomed mariner's head before, with a bowed head and a moment's prayer, consigning the unfortunate man's body to the depths. Muchas bocas, many mouths, she mused, recalling the obscene stigmata branding the dead captain's flesh. Aye, many mouths, but whose? Night fell quickly in the tropics, and soon the blazing Caribbean sun dipped beneath the waves. Heavy clouds, pregnant with unshed rain, obscured the moon and stars, rendering the night as black as a leech's heart. Choppy seas and strong winds made lamps too dangerous, so the El Dorado sailed by the light of a single candle, lodged in the wooden binnacle fore of the tiller, so the helmsman could read his compass by the candle's flickering glow. Alone in the crow's nest overlooking the night-shrouded galleon, Robin cursed the clouds concealing the moon. How could she hope to watch over the ship and her crew when the elements themselves conspired to hide her faceless adversary from sight? Even her superb eyes had their limits. Who, or, as Flossie says, what, was out there? A warm, salty wind blew from the northeast, stirring the fabric of her loose frock coat. Robin felt the roll of the ship almost 100 feet below her current perch. Keeping lookout from atop the mainmast was not a captain's duty, but it was a slayer's. In truth, Robin was more concerned with watching out for whatever might be prowling the ship's decks than surveying the turbulent seas through which they sailed. From the crow's nest, the upper decks of the galleon appeared deceptively quiet. Only a handful of men worked the sails in concert with the helmsman. The bulk of the crew, some 24 men, had retired to their freshly acquired berths within the forecastle. Pacing impatiently, Robin stared down into the shadows, her concentrated gaze sweeping the El Dorado from stem to stem. Although the day's searches had yielded no clandestine nest of leeches, she felt certain that some foul and loathsome bloodsucker still dwelt within and aboard the captured galleon, hungry to feast upon the lifeblood of her loyal buccaneers. "Where are ye, ye soul-lacking lubber?" she muttered. The toe of her boot tapped restlessly against the floor of the crow's nest. "I'll better things to do with me time than wait upon your vile pleasure." Glancing away from the ship below, she looked out past the bow. If she strained her eyes, she could barely glimpse the tops of Neptune's lady familiar masts. The treasure-laden schooner, sparing no effort in her haste to return to port, had easily outdistanced the much slower galleon. Robin felt a stab of irritation at being so blithely left behind by her own ship. "I shall have to deal with George Newgate in due course," she resolved in a scowl. Alas, the duly elected quartermaster was popular with the men, if not with their captain. She turned her gaze toward the sea behind her, lambent and phosphorescence, glowing like fairy fire atop the cascading rollers trailed behind the El Dorado in her wake. Robin wondered about the dead Spanish captain they had buried at sea many leagues astern. Did light of any sort penetrate the abysmal gloom of his watery resting place, or had his unfettered soul already ascended beyond such concerns? Feeling a kinship toward fellow seamen, regardless of his nationality, Robin vowed to avenge the other captain's wretched death, if only the guilty party would show its hideous face. Too restless to stay still, too weary to bear easily this endless nocturnal vigil, Robin yawned and returned to watching over the placid decks below, which remained maddeningly free of leeches and zombies and witch doctors and werebeasts and succubi, flying Dutchmen, or any other malevolent emissary of Erebus. Her fingers hovered expectantly over the grip of her silver cutlass. Yet hours passed without incident, and as dawn approached, Robin began to suspect that her vigil had been in vain, until the echoes of a distant shriek caused her head to jerk upright and her sword hand to tighten around the hilt of her weapon. "What in the devil?" she swore, for the faint yet tormented keening came not from the ship below, but from somewhere just beyond the horizon. "The schooner," she deduced at once, realizing to her horror that she had chosen to guard the wrong ship. A heartbeat later, she remembered just which vessel her watcher and Carmelita were sailing upon. "William!" They caught up with Neptune's lady just before dawn. The schooner was lying to upon the aquamarine sea, its sails artfully set in opposition to each other so as to keep the ship more or less stationary. Robin chose to take this as a good omen, proof that at very least someone remained alive aboard the other vessel. Drawing nearer, she breathed a sigh of relief as she spied clusters of seemingly unscathed seamen, milling about upon the schooner's upper decks. Nonetheless, she wasted no time boarding Neptune's lady as soon as they overhauled the pirate craft, leaping over the galleon's gunwales onto the planks of the smaller ship. Her boots touched down just forward of the mainmast, where the majority of the crew appeared gathered. She knew at once that something was amiss. A foreboding silence greeted her arrival, while the faces of the men, which had positively shone with triumph and lustful anticipation when last she saw them, now seemed drawn and discontented, their sour expressions composed of equal parts of fear and anger. "That time you got here, Captain," George Newgate said with a sneer, as though he had not expressly chosen to place long, rolling leagues between the schooner and the El Dorado himself. A great hairy bear of a man with a livid white scar over one eye, the quartermaster leaned insolently against the mainmast, his beefy arms across the top of his naked chest. His bristling blonde beard had been bleached nearly white by the West Indian sun. "You fairly missed all the commotion, Captain." Robin ignored Newgate's flagrant insubordination. For now, craning her neck to peer over the head and shoulders of the motley crew thronging the schooner's waist, she spotted Dr. Pratt and Carmelita standing apart from the others in the shadow of the quarterdeck, their backs against the forward wall of the captain's cabin. The physician had one arm draped protectively over the senorita's shoulders, while the other hand clutched the grip of a ready flintlock pistol. His countenance was, if possible, even more somber than customary. "Well?" Robin demanded, striding across the deck toward the doctor in his charge. An empty bottle of rum, its neck snapped off by an impatient pirate, rolled fore and aft between the sailor's feet. "What ill tidings do you have for me?" Her probing eyes surveyed the crowd of sailors, finding certain faces disturbingly absent. "Where be Ezra Davis and One-Eyed Ned?" "Gone, Captain," Newgate growled, stalking away from the mast. "And a half-dozen others besides. Vanished without a trace, the dead of night." He shoved his way through the mob to confront Robin face to face. Spittle flew past his tawny whiskers as he hurled his words at her like smoldering grenades. "Just like the dawns on that accursed galleon you led us to." Hellfire, Robin thought bitterly. She blamed herself for not anticipating that the faceless evil upon the El Dorado might transfer itself from one vessel to the other. "This be dark, dastardly business, I grant ye," she said, shaking her head mournfully before assuming a more determined mien. "But fear not, mateys. I'll track this contagion to its root. You have me word on that." "Why, you needn't look very hard, Captain." Newgate drew himself up dramatically and shook an accusing finger at Carmelita Laponte, still cowering beneath Dr. Pratt's arm, her tremulous lips mouthing a ceaseless plea for deliverance. "There's the baneful albatross that cost our shipmates their lives, that Spanish witch." "Belay that talk," Robin barked. "Are you mad? Look at her. She's no more dangerous than a wisp of seaweed. Less so I won't." "So you say, Captain, but I have me doubts." He raised his voice so that all present could attend to his words. "Be it just a coincidence that this slip of a girl survived where so many able-bodied soldiers and seamen perished? We brought her aboard the Lady out of the goodness of our hearts, and now 8 of our brethren have been spirited away to the good Lord knows where." The smirk betrayed his seditious designs as he stared pointedly at Robin. "'Tis well known that a woman aboard a ship brings nothing but ill luck, Captain." Robin swallowed hard behind her knotted silk cravat. A gaping pit formed in her stomach as she felt the mood of the men turning against her. Loyal crewmen who had fought beside her through fire and steel now looked away, refusing to meet her gaze. How many of them know my true sex? She wondered anxiously. And for how long have they known? Angry muttering mixed with sullen glances and sneers seemed to surround Robin as she backed waywardly toward Dr. Pratt and Carmelita. "Toss the Spanish wench overboard!" The scowling buccaneer snarled, spitting in the senorita's direction, and Robin heard truculent voices murmur in agreement. Her spine stiffened and she drew her cutlass. Although her deepest, most private doubts and fears appeared to be coming true before her eyes, she was not yet ready to cede command to the likes of George Newgate. "Stay back!" she warned, cutting a swath through the air with the blessed blade of her cutlass. "I've never sacrificed a defenseless hostage before, and by thunder, I'll be hanged if I'm starting now." She snorted contemptuously at the panicky buccaneers. "The Spaniard's gold came aboard this ship here as well as same as Senorita Ponte. Yet I don't hear anyone suggesting we heave all that glitter and booty over the sides." Her slashing blade drove the crowd of pirates back a few paces, so that they formed a half circle around Robin, the doctor, and Carmelita, with the front of the quarterdeck at their backs. Robin hoped her stinging rebuke would take the wind out of this incipient mutiny, but George Newgate, curse his perfidious soul, pressed the issue further. "Who saw you taken, Captain?" he challenged her, all but flinging that last word. He drew his own sword and snatched a loaded pistol from his belt. "Maybe you'd be worried more about your own shipmates and less about some papist Jezebel. Ezra Davis and the others would still be walking these planks beside us, not condemned to suffer for all eternity through some unholy limbo. Captain!" "I thought the danger was aboard the El Dorado," she thought, racked with anguish and regret. "Else I would never have left the Neptune's lady without a slayer." Her heart bled for the squandered souls of the missing buccaneers. She knew better, though, than to justify herself to a rebellious crew. And so we reached the top of the hour. Yes, our story will be going on a bit longer. I was hoping to be done by 8, so I could send you over to hear Finn's story tonight at 8 o'clock. Perchance you want to go hear that. You can catch the rest of this on the YouTube channel. And perchance you want to stay here with us, then we shall carry on. Here we go. "Quite the orator you've become, George Newgate, but do you care to test me metal with more than just empty words?" A murderous smile upon her lips, she beckoned him with her free hand while holding the silver cutlass aloft. "Come then, if you have the stomach for it. I can always find another quartermaster." The scar-faced man blanched behind his beard, perhaps recalling Robin's preternatural strength and speed. "This isn't about taking command," he blustered through his lying teeth. "It's about the safety of this crew." He looked about him expectantly, seeking support. "Then they're right, lads. Meh. I'm not risking my skin for some mongrel jinx," another crewman called out. Newgate's cronies seconded the sentiment, crowding forward to lend their tattooed and sunburned weight to the quartermaster's defiance. Of the rest, none seemed willing to stand up to the rebels for the sake of the captain or Carmelita. Be their fear that great, Robin had to wonder, or be it that were naught but mere women? It despaired her to think that her crew's loyalty ran no deeper than her slender facade of masculinity. In any event, it was clear as fresh spring water that more than one-on-one duel with Newgate was in the offing. Her azure eyes narrowed as she coolly assessed her position. Even counting Dr. Pratt's flintlock, the odds were woefully against her. Very well, she thought, resolved to sell her life dearly if needs be. She smiled bleakly at the dark humor of it. After battling the ravening legions of hell for all these many voyages, in the end it was her own merry band of cutthroats that slipped her the black spot. Watch me stern, she sharply instructed Dr. Pratt, concerned that the furtive mutineers might attempt to drop down on them from atop the quarterdeck, or perhaps from the spider's web of rigging strung out above them. And pray, keep your eyes lifted. Understood, her watcher intoned solemnly. Robin kept her own gaze squarely fixed on Newgate and his belligerent cohorts. So, she dared them, shall we get to fighting? Let us see whose blood will flood the scuppers. An uneasy silence ensued as Robin faced off against the encroaching pirates. None, it appeared, wanted to be the first to attempt the captain's cutlass. Perdition take you all! Newgate finally howled in frustration. She's just one scoundrel by the powers, and an execrated woman to boot! Rush her, man! Rush her! An icy chill stabbed Robin's heart as Newgate unfurled her most tightly wrapped secret. So be it, she concluded resolutely. After the initial shock, she felt strangely relieved to have the matter dredged up to the surface at last. No more flying under false colors. Wait! Another voice cried out, belonging to Jeremiah Pyle, the helmsman whose leathery neck Robin had but recently rescued from the leech's fangs. There be no need for bloodshed, mates. We have 2 ships, don't we? Let each man choose whom he sails with, and then let us go our separate ways. A chorus of approving shouts and exclamations applauded the proposed compromise, and even George Newgate appeared to welcome the chance to duck a battle to the death against Robin and her allies. Ah, the ayes have it, then, he declared with a magnanimous shrug. But I claim the El Dorado by virtue of my clear majority. Robin was more than willing to cede him the grander vessel, whose ominous history had now been overshadowed by the yet fresher depredations aboard Neptune's Lady. For once she found herself in agreement with the scheming quartermaster. As Newgate himself doubtless did, Robin prayed that the curse of the doomed galleon, which had seemingly shifted to the luckless schooner, would not move on again. In the end, Newgate and the Eldorado got the lion's share of the crew. He therefore insisted that the bulk of the treasure be transferred to the galleon as well, an onerous and back-breaking chore that took up the better part of the morning. Soon enough, however, both vessels unfurled their sails and set course for the pirate refuge of Port Royal. Well said, Jim. Now it was Robin's turn to leave Newgate behind. Even with naught but a skeleton crew to man the sails, Neptune's Lady quickly outpaced the lumbering galleon, ploughing the waves as nimbly as a chimbly with a leaping porpoise. The schooner's own figurehead, carved in the likeness of a comely mermaid with chiseled golden ringlets, tumbled down her back toward a fishly emerald tail, looked out as Robin did over the churning expanse of sea before them. With a favorable wind drawing her sails, the lady might well come within sight of Jamaica in 2 days' time. Robin wondered if any aboard the schooner would still be alive to see land again. After ensuring that all was shipshape and thanking the remaining crew for their steadfastness, she retreated to her cabin beneath the quarterdeck, where she found Dr. Pratt engrossed in his studies. The dead captain's logbook was spread out open atop the lacquered walnut desk, while ancient volumes of arcane lore were piled high upon the floor beside his chair. Dr. Pratt did love his ancient mystic books and tomes, indeed. Carmelita Leponte, fallen into an unsettled sleep, occupied Robin's cozy berth in the side compartment, visible through an open doorway. By the piteous moans that escaped her lips and the spastic twitching of her limbs, it was heartbreakingly apparent that slumber offered the poor maiden no relief from the nightmare visions and the hellish memories plaguing her troubled mind. "Muchas bocas," she whispered, not quite so softly that Robin's keen ears could not hear her cryptic lament. "Tantas bocas, tantas bocas." A shudder passed through Robin as she translated the foreign phrases into proper English. Many mouths. So many mouths. "Have you found anything?" she asked Dr. Pratt. Barely literate herself, she depended on her watcher for any scholarly assistance that might be required. "I fear not," he answered, raising his eyes from the handwritten text before him. He glanced cautiously at Carmelita's sleeping form and lowered his voice before continuing. "The late Capitan Aponte's log describes how night after night his entire crew gradually disappeared. It's a classic pattern which nearly always signals the presence of a lurking vampire aboard the afflicted vessel. This undead stowaway lurks in the lower reaches of the ship by day, emerging at night to prey upon the hapless crew members whose bloodless bodies the vampire then heaves over the rails, thus concealing his own presence." Puzzlement was written upon his saturnine features. "And yet you say you found no evidence of an infestation aboard either ship?" Robin shook her head. "I searched the Eldorado from stem to stern when we first found her, and just did the same for Lady. I'll prowl the ship again if you like, but I'll tell you plain, it would be a fool's errand." She paced restlessly about the narrow cabin. "If some foul thing be aboard, it's beyond mortal eyes to see." The doctor said thoughtfully, stroking his chin. "Invisibility. I had not thought of that." He nodded a stack of venerable tomes tottering precariously upon the swaying floor. "Pray, fetch me Ambrosius's Chronicles of Realms Unseen. That gilt-edged volume. There. No, that one. Yes," he added, noting Robin's blank expression. She located the desired text, which felt strangely cold and slimy to the touch, like an algae-covered rock at low tide, intending to hand it over to Dr. Pratt forthwith. She took one step toward the desk when, without a warning, numbing shock flowed up her arms from fingertips to her shoulders, causing her to drop the unhallowed book as though it were ablaze. "What is it?" Dr. Pratt asked, springing from his seat so abruptly that the chair toppled over behind him, his bushy black brows lifted in alarm. "Are you unwell?" Robin heard his anxious inquiries, yet her attention was elsewhere. As the feeling returned to her arms, nigh as swiftly as it departed, she stared in wide-eyed amazement at the book upon the floor, which had fallen open and revealed 2 of its myriad pages. "Shiver my soul!" She could not read any of the words inscribed upon the pages, or even the very alphabet of which the writings were composed bore no resemblance to any language she had ever encountered before, making the ornate and inscrutable hieroglyphics of the Far East look like a child's ABCs. But there was no mistaking the grotesque illustration, engraved with exacting, if abominable precision, that accompanied the indecipherable scribblings. A tentacled monstrosity, with eyes the color of rubies, reigning atop a throne of skulls. "I know that ugly devil," she blurted out loudly. "There was a golden effigy of the very same creature stowed in the hold of the El Dorado with the rest of the treasure." "Good Lord!" the doctor gasped. "Are you certain?" "As ever I was." This be no chance event, she realized. Providence in its wisdom sometimes gifted slayers with prophetic dreams and hints of knowledge beyond their ken. She felt very clearly the hand of fate at work here. Gently taking care not to lose their place, Dr. Pratt lifted the supine volume from the floor and laid it upon the desktop. A beam of radiant sunlight entering the cabin through a glass porthole fell upon the exposed pages, permitting her and the doctor to behold the telltale portrait in all its repugnant detail. Upon closer inspection, Robin saw that the squid-like beast was not alone. Tiny figures squirmed within the coils of the monster, while others fell helplessly into the creature's gaping beak, their paltry arms and legs extended in all directions. With a start, Robin realized that the minuscule figures, so small and insignificant in the picture with respect to the many-armed colossus, represented grown men and women. Mere symbolism, she wondered, or a portrait drawn from an all too hideous reality. Robin suddenly recalled the wild stories she had heard in seaports all around the globe about a mythical sea monster called a kraken. "And what became of the golden idol you spoke of?" Dr. Pratt inquired, urgency coloring his voice. His careworn visage seemed to age visibly as he contemplated the dreadful illustration. "Where is it now?" "Well, I cannot say for certain," Robin admitted. There had been so much gold aboard the Spanish treasure ship, so many priceless baubles. "But I'll wager you 100 guineas that it spent last night in the hull of this very vessel." "Yes," Dr. Pratt agreed, his mind speeding in concert with her own. "It must have been brought aboard the schooner during the initial division of the spoils." His gaze dropped to the floor as though to peer through the solid wooden planks. "But is it still below? That scoundrel Newgate claimed most of the treasure for himself." Robin tried to remember if the pagan idol had been among the booty returned to the El Dorado before the parted company with Newgate and the rest, but her foggy recollections were interrupted by the unexpected sound of a hysterical woman crying out in mortal terror. "Muchas pocas, pocas, pocas! Oh, muchas pocas!" Carmelita shrieked, staring at the thunderstruck eyes at the open book. Intent upon the revelatory pages, neither Robin nor Dr. Pratt had observed Carmelita bestir herself from sleep, then rise from the portside berth to approach them. Now the sole survivor of the El Dorado's original complement, her ashen face contorted in abject fear, pointed at the finely rendered kraken and its guppy-sized victims. "Muchas bocas, tantas bocas!" "Faster, faster, curse you!" Raising the setting sun, Robin stood atop the forecastle, urging her crew and her ship to greater speed. Every square inch of sail had been unfurled, and Neptune's lady was virtually flying atop the waves, but Robin had not yet caught sight of the El Dorado's lofty masts. Glancing to the west, she winced as she watched the tropical sun plunge toward the horizon, chilling blood-red streamers across the twilight sky. A rapid inventory of the schooner's hold had yielded no sign of the blasphemous idol, suggesting that the accursed sculpture once more resided upon the captured galleon. Consequently, Robin had immediately turned Neptune's lady around and set out in search of the other ship. Although the faithlessness of the mutineers still galled her soul, Captain Whitby knew she had no choice but to try to save Newgate and the others from the hellish fate in store for them. She was, after all, the Slayer. A briny spray splashed against her face as she peered out over the prow. The schooner's tapered bowsprit stabbed at the cresting swells ahead of them in the rhythm with the persistent susurrance of the blue-green waters breaking against the stem. A strong northeast wind blew at cross purposes to their course, forcing them to tack back and forth in order to make any headway against the opposing gusts. Robin ground her teeth in frustration and clutched her spyglass so tightly that her powerful fingers indented the scope's metal casing. "See you, say. I think we're going to go to about 8:41. Then we'll all have snacks and pee breaks, and hopefully you'll come back for 9 o'clock, part 2 of The Last of Placide's Wife. But now, back to our story. Step lively, you sea dogs, she demanded, even though the schooner had to be making 10 knots at the very least. Dr. Pratt held tightly to the forecastle rail behind her, his pale lips pinched together. Trim her closer! Closer! The sun sank like an anchor beneath the Caribbean, casting everything above the sea into darkness. Last night's gravid clouds veiled the moon and stars once more, giving Robin not a jot of light to sail by. You did your very best, Robin, Dr. Pratt offered by way of meager consolation. Those rogues brought their doom upon themselves through their own base avarice and duplicity. Petty sins, Robin opined, unwilling to accept such solace. A pirate captain, she knew, was hardly one to pass judgment over fellow mortals, undeserving of so loathsome a fate. As though unwittingly conjured by her doleful pronouncement, the screams of dying men erupted from the night, reaching the schooner from somewhere across the waves. Robin peered anxiously through the spyglass, but the distance and darkness conspired to hide the source of the screams from her view. That the horrible shrieking came from the El Dorado, she had no doubt. No, no, go! Robin cursed. Not again! From the din of the strident cries, she judged that the besieged galleon could be only minutes away at top speed. Helmsman, she called out to a faithful Jeremiah Pyle, set course for those poor tormented souls. Those poor unfortunate souls. Although many a crewman blanched at the prospect of drawing nearer to the genesis of that fearful cacophony, they hastened to obey Robin's shouted commands. The elements, alas, were not so obliging, as just at this crucial juncture, the wind abruptly failed, causing the sails to sag lifelessly before the gaffs, and the Neptune's lady slowed to a halt. No! Robin stared listless sheets in disbelief. It was as though fate itself were intent on preventing her from coming to the rescue of the imperiled buccaneers. Confound it, she yelled. Hopelessly becalmed, the schooner bobbed upon rolling swell. More than a few of the men, distinctly relieved to have been so stalled in their progress toward the fearful whaling. But Robin refused to surrender. If nature herself would not be willing to provide the wind required, then she would just have to manufacture one for herself. Get to your magics, doctor, she instructed her watcher, who hurriedly scrambled aft towards his library. Meanwhile, Robin resorted to the time-honored tradition of the sea, pursing her lips to whistle loudly for a wind, pausing only to command all in earshot to do the same. Whistle! Whistle! She ordered vehemently. Whistle as though your scurvy lives depended upon it, men. Hesitantly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm, the staunch buccaneers whistled at will, producing a discordant babble of sharp toots and trills. The raucous whistling competed bizarrely with the agonized shrieks issuing from the unseen galleon. Aye, that's it, a proper racket indeed. Robin encouraged her men. Keep on a-warbling. Invoking another hallowed superstition, she drew a dagger from her belt, drove it into the foremast, indicating the direction of the wind she sought. Even as she did so, Dr. Pratt came running forward, gripping a dilapidated leather-bound volume. Robin was surprised to see Carmelita Ponte emerge from the stern cabin as well, trailing nervously behind the captain like a dinghy cruising in a flagship's wake. Unto Eris, Soyon of Astrea and Eos, Captain Pratt recited sonorously, reading aloud from the mystical tome. Unto Hecatel Veyu is Dadaman Aeolus. I beseech thee, masters of the air, grant us beneficent exhalations. Bracing his back against the foremast, facing the bow, he raised his right hand. Breathe, breathe. Exhalere! Was it the pirate's whistling, or Dr. Pratt's more arcane incantation that did the trick? Robin neither knew nor cared, as with a resounding crack, the flaccid sills billowed outward, and Neptune's lady charged forward like a cannon shot so swiftly that Robin had to grab onto a standing line to steady herself. Aye, she exulted triumphantly, this be more like it. Then those same powerful thrusts blew the overhanging clouds away from the moon. A silvery lunar radiance fell upon the nocturnal sea, revealing at last the unspeakable horror Robin had already envisioned. The El Dorado, nearly half a league away, was under attack by an immense sea monster, identical to the one depicted in that gruesome illustration. Monstrous tentacles the size of soaring masts rose from the turbulent white froth surrounding the galleon, black as ebony and glistening wetly. The mammoth limbs snatched the panicked mutineers off the towering upper decks of the besieged treasure ship, just as they must have silently plucked last night's victims from the more modest environs of the schooner. But those furtive abductions had clearly only whetted the kraken's voracious appetite, which now was aroused to gargantuan proportions. "Release the kraken!" Heavy tarpaulins were torn asunder and battened hatches thrown carelessly open as the questing tentacles endowed with grasping palps at their tips probed below decks in pursuit of fresh human meals. Shuddering at the purgatorial tableau before her bulging eyes, Robin well imagined how an equally ravenous assault must have emptied the galleon of its previous crew, save for the captain lashed to the whipstaff and the terrified senorita cowering down in the hole inside the closed teak casket. For certain it's the fault of that demoniac idol, she realized angrily. The cursed statue surely acted as a beacon to its demonic inspiration, luring the kraken up from the dark, abysmal depth. I should have hurled that ugly bit of ballast over the side the minute I laid eyes upon it. Through the magnifying lenses of the spyglass, Robin watched, aghast as her former shipmates fought desperately and futilely against the invading tentacles. Slashing blades and smoking pistols, along with the frantically wielded axes and marlin spikes, inflicted little damage on those enormous limbs, whose leathery hide appeared all but impervious to harm. Robin saw a merciless tentacle wrapped like a boa constrictor around the writhing form of George Newgate. Ring-like suckers the size of doubloons, abundantly arrayed upon the underside of those relentless tentacles, affixed themselves to Newgate's bare throat and chest. Despite his perfidy, Robin's eyes widened in dismay as she watched the traitorous quartermaster's lifeblood drain out of him, leaving him as pale and lifeless as the late Capitan Ponte. Robin instantly recalled the puckered stigmata upon the dead Spaniard's flesh, and an icy shiver of comprehension ran down her spine. Not even Newgate, she thought ruefully, deserved so deplorable an end as that. A heartbeat later, the hungry tentacle dragged the bearded man's bloodless carcass beneath the roiling foam, to be devoured, no doubt, by the kraken's crushing beak. Her face white as well, Robin mutely passed the spyglass over to Dr. Pratt so the watcher might also comprehend the full malignancy of the hell beast assailing the galleon. A sharp intake of breath, followed by a whispered, "Good Lord," announced that he, too, had witnessed the thirsty suckers at work. "Vampiroteuthis infernalis," he identified the beast. By the way, as with all stories we are sharing this October, tonight's story is completely true. Though some may debate that, I offer as evidence this squid. No, really, look it up on Google. It's real. Yee. Dr. Pratt slowly lowered the spyglass. "The vampire squid from hell." He shook his aged head in awful wonder. "But I never dreamed it could grow so large." "Muchas bocas," Carmelita Ponte confirmed. Hugging tightly to the sturdy trunk of the foremast, she nodded gravely in recognition of the multiple-limbed monstrosity that had sucked the life from her father and his crew. Robin knew now the nature of the many mouths that haunted the young woman's memory. And a cold wind carried them quickly toward the kraken's appalling feast. Within minutes, Robin and the others no longer needed the telescope to behold the atrocity taking place upon that galleon. Desperate to escape the insatiable tentacles, the frenzied mutineers took to the rigging, climbing higher and higher in a last-ditch bid to evade the horrid death that already claimed their shipmates. But the gluttonous beast would not be cheated of its prey. Wrapping two of its mighty arms around the El Dorado's bow, it pulled itself up onto the ship's prow, so that its remaining tentacles could reach all the way to the tops of the masts. Clinging to the galleon's prow like a grotesque, fleshy figurehead, the kraken's entire body was now exposed, granting Robin a fuller look at this monster. See, Jeb knows stuff. At least 30 feet long, the giant squid's bulging mantle was a mass of black, pulpating muscle, like the beating heart of some even more colossal archdevil. Seen in profile as Neptune's lady approached at a 90-degree angle to the galleon's starboard side, the kraken's lurid red eye was the size of a sea witch's crystal ball. Its chitinous beak clanked hungrily as it chowed down upon the blood-drained corpses of its slain pirates. Robin counted 10 tentacles in all, including the 2 that now held the beast glued to the prow. The ponderous weight of the monster was such that the bow of the mountainous galleon dipped into the sea, raising the stern along with the rudder many yards above the foaming brine. Dislodged seamen pulled from the poop and quarterdecks as the forward tilt of the treasure ship catapulted them into the air to land clumsily upon the rigging or timber planks below. A burly freebooter, Francois Laveau, grandsire of Marie Laveau of Louisiana fame, who we'll encounter later at 9 o'clock, repeatedly jabbed a wooden marlin spike at the sinuous tentacle now lifting him from the beakhead of the askew galleon. But his fear-crazed efforts were in vain. The vicious prong did little more than scratch the kraken's tough and slippery hide. A second later, Francois Laveau's gray desiccated body joined the others, disappearing down the squid's yawning maw. As Neptune's lady closed on the horrific scene, coming within 1,000 yards of the galleon's bow, Robin contemplated her own trusty cutlass, which struck her as starkly inadequate against so gigantic a behemoth. She briefly considered bringing the schooner's cannon to bear, but quickly discarded the notion. The havoc inflicted by a blazing barrage of round shot would most likely devastate the surviving buccaneers more than the unstoppable kraken. What then was she to do? Robin had slain many a leech, but never one so much larger than herself. Well, I can't just stab a stake through its filthy heart this time, she lamented silently. Or wait, can I? Inspiration struck Captain Robin Whitby then, and cutlass in hand she crawled out under the bowsprit, gripping the angled wooden spar between her knees. Spume splashed against her, drenching her clothes, and splinters of pine flew like sparks as she hacked away at the tip of the bowsprit, sharpening it to a jagged point. The El Dorado, held tight in the kraken's embrace, loomed before her, so near that Robin could smell the putrid stench of that sea monster, which reeked like a heap of rotting fish left too long in the sun. Beneath her, only a few yards back, the lady's undinal figurehead looked on impassively, offering Robin a measure of sisterly support. "Dead ahead!" she called out over the roar of the sea. Finished it at the spar's tip, she slid back down the bowsprit to the forecastle. "Aim this rotten ship right through that devil's heart." Pyle did not falter at the tiller. Galloping over the waves, her close-hauled sails pinched tightly to the wind, Neptune's lady slammed into the kraken, driving the sharpened bowsprit into the vampire squid, becoming the world's largest wooden stake. A crimson geyser rushed from the impaled beast, gushing forth, the gory Vesuvius adding to the salt spray dousing Robin's face and garments. Letting go of the El Dorado, the kraken writhed in agony, its tentacles flailing wildly. The schooner tilted forward as the weight of the creature pulled the prow down. Robin held her breath and exhaled in relief as the kraken slid off the pointed spar back into the brine. Before her grateful eyes, the wounded monster disappeared beneath the foam, leaving a thick cloud of stolen blood behind. Can it be? She wondered. Did I truly kill it? The creature had surely seemed mortally injured, but how could she be sure? Leaning over the main rail, she peered into the depth, just as the tip of a vengeful tentacle burst forth from the bloody froth and wrapped itself around Robin's right forearm. Greedy suckers bit into her flesh, drawing out her blood even through the sleeves of her soaking coat and shirt. The clammy pulp tugged on her with inhuman vigor, threatening to yank her over the rail and into the sea. Grunting in pain, Robin clung to the gunwale with her free hand. "Help me!" she cried out. "I can't hold on! Help me!" Heedlessly dropping the valuable spellbook onto the swaying deck, Dr. Pratt scrambled to his slayer's aid. His bony fingers pried at the stubborn tentacle coiled around Robin's arm, but he could not extricate the imprisoned limb from the kraken's grasp. "It's too bloody strong," he gasped. Aid came from an unexpected quarter, then. Clutching an axe she must have found discarded upon the deck, Carmelita Ponte raced forward and began chopping the tentacle with unexpected fury. "Liberala, permette, liberala!" The kraken's hide was too tough and impenetrable, however, so the valiant senorita labored to no avail. Her feverish blows barely scratched the surface of the unyielding tentacle. "No," Robin groaned. "There be only one course left to us now." Her strength fading, she stared urgently into Carmelita's eyes, and then shifted her gaze down to where her upper arm emerged from the tentacle's coils. "Comprende?" she pleaded, praying that the Spanish girl would realize what was necessary. Understanding dawned upon Carmelita's face. "No, no," she protested, shaking her head. "You must," Robin entreated. Her feet slid perilously upon the deck as she fought to stay aboard. Darkness encroached on her vision, dimming the moonlight as her blood fed the submerged sea monster. A sickly lassitude beckoned, and she struggled to keep her eyes open. "Now!" Carmelita nodded. Biting down hard on her lower lip, she raised the hatchet high, then chopped off Robin's arm just below her elbow. Robin screamed as the tentacle disappeared into the sea. taking the Slayer's right hand with it. Da-da-da-dum. There, Dr. Pratt said approvingly. A perfect fit. Resting in the cabin of Neptune's lady, Robin inspected the physician's handiwork. A custom-made timber stump with an empty cavity sufficient to bear a wooden stake, a silver spike, or any other implement that seemed necessary. Robin Whitby swung her arm experimentally, imagining it in battle. Killian Jones would be proud of her. "Will do," she decided, wincing slightly as she recalled the rough amputation that had preserved her life at the expense of her hand. Although Dr. Pratt had swiftly cauterized the wound by sealing it with boiling pitch, the brutal shock, along with the attendant blood loss, had taxed even her prodigious powers of recuperation. "Thank you, Doctor," she said sincerely. "I figure it might be a miracle we came through that fray alive, trifle less than intact." "Indeed," her watcher agreed. "It's not every day or night that one encounters such a formidable denizen of the deep. From my reading, I believe it to be no less than a chthonic remnant left over from the primordial days of when the elder demons ruled the earth and the seas." Cthulhu. Robin tried to picture a bygone age when the likes of the blood-sucking kraken dwelt in abundance throughout the oceans of the world. An icy shiver crept down her back. "Thank heaven that wretched idol is gone at last," she mused. Despite her injury, she had personally seen to it that the golden effigy was tossed over the sides of the galleon and had watched with profuse relief as the idol sank under the waves, where if Providence was kind, it would remain lost for all time. "Good night, Maya. Moments away, really moments away." So much for matters infernal, she concluded, rising from her chair and marching out of the cabin. Now there was but one more bit of business to deal with. The deck of the schooner was alive with the sun-baked bodies of busy buccaneers tending to the sails as Neptune's lady journeyed back to Jamaica. Off the starboard rail, the El Dorado, somewhat the worse for the wear, but still seaworthy, lumbered alongside the schooner, manned by a newly contrite crew of formidable mutineers. A warm tropical breeze helped speed both vessels on their way. Robin climbed onto the quarterdeck and, placing 2 fingers to her lips, whistled to get the men's attention. "Ahoy!" she hollered, raising her truncated right arm. "Give me your ears, every man jack of you." All eyes turned toward the captain, curious and dutiful. Among the upturned faces, Robin was amused to see Carmelita Ponte's exotic features. Having traded in her bedraggled saffron gown for a much more practical sailor's garb, the orphan senorita, whose bruised wits and spirit had mended considerably since saving Robin from the kraken, appeared to be blending into the pirate crew with remarkable ease. Encouraged by Carmelita's example, Robin doffed her heavy woolen coat. With but one set of fingers at her disposal was awkward work, but soon the bulky garment dropped limply onto the spray-stained planks. Robin then fumbled with the bottom of her striped linen shirt, knotting it tightly beneath her bosom, so that her unmistakably feminine contours were made manifest. The strangling cravat was next to go and carried away by the wind as Robin tossed it heedlessly aside. "Well," she demanded, daring all and sundry to make issue of her sex, "here I be, and all me unmasked glory." She posed with arms akimbo, looking out over the length of the schooner. "Does anyone care to question me command?" A rousing cheer dispelled her doubts once and for all. "Hurrah for Captain Rob!" Jeremiah called out boisterously, and the rest of the beaming pirates took up the cheer. Even Carmelita, despite her scanty command of English, joined in. "Captain Rob forever!" The Slayer basked in the acclamation of her crew, ready at that moment to take on a score of leeches and Spaniards alike. "Feels good to be a woman again," she reflected. The steady breeze blew past her, ruffling her trim auburn locks, while filling her nostrils with the intoxicating aroma of the open sea. "Perhaps I'll even grow me hair long again."